Hello, folks. Welcome to the Casual Causal Talk, episode 3. Today's guest has been referred by not just by one data scientist, but 8 data scientists. And he's a renowned voice in the field of causal inference. He's the author of the famous book, Causal Inference for the True and the Brave. I'm honored to introduce to you all Matheus Facure. Welcome, Matheus Facure. How are you today?
Hi, thanks for having me. Really looking forward for the conversation, and thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, we are glad to have you, Matheus. And yeah, the very first question that I ask everybody, right? How did you get started with causal inference?
So yeah, I don't think I got started in the sense that okay, it suddenly hit me. I've graduated in economics, so that's something I've seen in grad school. Now it really took off. Like I really took off the interest for it when I noticed a lots of problems in my company that were fundamentally causal in nature, and we were trying to solve them as prediction problems, and this was leading to a bunch of issues in the business itself. So at some point in time, I decided, hey, I'm really going to invest in this. I'm going to invest in explaining this problem to people in a way that they can grasp as a causal problem. And in my journey through to explaining causal inference to data science, I think I really got into it in the sense that it really interested me at that point.
Right. Can you explain what is causality in 3 levels of difficulty? Of course, this is inspired by the Wired's 5 levels of difficulty, if you have seen it. So the levels are grandma. Of course, I don't mean to say that, grandmas know about causality, but here I'm just assuming here's a grandma who doesn't know about, economics or causality. And the second level is a college fresher who is just getting started with causal inference classes. And the third is, of course, a causal expert. So how would you go about explaining, what is causality to these 3 people?
Okay, I'll try. I think it's going to be harder for me the most complex level, but for grandma, I would say something like, so I have 2 kids, right? So let's say that I have 2 kids, Francisco and Nina, and let's say that you spend time with me and you notice that Francisco is always on timeout. It's always on timeout. Every time I put him on timeout, and Nina, I don't put Nina on timeout. She is very kind. She's always like free to do whatever she wants. But Francisco, I always add a lot of restriction to him. I am usually very harsh on him. And you might see this and say, and you also notice at this time that Francisco tends to be very defiant and doing a lot of doing a mess all the time and not being very compliant. And you might say, hey, look, your timeout is not working. Your timeout probably it's making things worse because look, you don't apply timeouts to Nina, but you apply timeouts to Francisco. And just by looking at them, I can see that Nina is very kind, is very gentle, she's very compliant, and Francisco is always on timeout. And I can really see that Francisco is struggling a lot. He's very defiant, he's doing a mess all the time. And I can see that you put him on timeout, and this clearly is not working because he's full of energy, he's playing all the time and making a mess. So timeout in this case is clearly not working. It's making Francisco defiant, it's making him mad. It probably shouldn't do timeout. So this is someone looking externally and seeing those 2 things co-occurring. The timeout is co-occurring. It's occurring at the same time as a bad behavior. And you might conclude from that, okay, the timeout is actually causing the bad behavior. But you might not have considered the other way around, which is that because Francisco is very defiant, he tends to go to timeout more than Nina. Nina is not defined at all, so she doesn't go to timeout. So you can see 2 things co-occurring, but if you don't know how the timeout was decided, then you cannot really tell which one causes which. You cannot tell if it's the timeout that is causing the bad behavior, or if it's the bad behavior that is causing the timeout, because you don't know how the timeout was decided. So causality really tries to untangle this thing. Like I have two events co-occurring. I will need to know which one causes which, or if it's something else that might be causing both of them. And I really need to understand how can I untangle this. So in this situation, what you can do is you can actually look at very smart people in the university that they can do something like study behavior on kids, and they can do something like a bunch of kids, like 100 kids, 1,000 kids, and they can recruit parents and say, hey, for half of the people randomly, if you see a bad behavior, you're going to apply timeout. For the other half chosen randomly, you're not going to apply timeout. You're just going to sit with them and you're going to ask them to stop. And you can try this two stuff. You can try the timeout. And just talking to them. And after a while, you can call back those people and ask them, okay, so did the bad behavior improved? And then you can actually see, okay, in the group that was assigned the timeout, the group that was assigned timeout, you may say, okay, so the timeout group really had the bad behavior decreased much more than the group of people that had just the conversation, just sitting and talking with the kid. You can see now it's a bunch of people. You randomized, you gave randomly, some people you assigned a timeout, some other people you assigned just sitting and talking. And by that, you can conclude that, okay, if the group of people that got the timeout really decreased the amount of bad behavior, now you can claim, okay, I'm pretty almost certainly that the timeout is causing a decrease in bad behavior. And the fact that when you looked at isolated on my family and you saw bad behavior and timeout co-occurring, it's not that the timeout is causing the bad behavior, it's just probably that I apply more timeouts to the kid that is more defiant. So that's how that's the upper level of how I would explain causality. It's a long story, but to make it simpler, I think it
That
has to
was
be
an
long.
excellent example. I think it definitely ticks the box of, explaining to grandma, and of course it ticks the box to, explaining it to a college fresher. Uh, I think if you had to add more nuance to, let's say, a causal expert, would you add, something like a counterfactual here?
Yeah, I think for an expert, I think what we would think of is that causality is basically thinking in terms of parallel worlds and thinking what would happen if I did this instead of that. So that's how we conceptualize. So we can talk about the same example, right? So we have let's say that in causal inference we have this term which is a treatment. That's some decision, some intervention that we make. So in this case, the treatment is timeouts. Let's say that I'm trying to understand the effect of timeout on bad behavior. I have to properly define what bad behavior is. So let's say it's not complying, shouting, something like that. So I properly define bad behavior, and then I apply. My question becomes, how bad behavior is going to turn out to be under the presence of timeout versus no timeout for the same individual. So this is a causal question. Like I have a same individual, and I want to understand what will happen to this individual under an intervention and under no intervention. And of course, I cannot know this for a same individual because I don't have parallel words. I can only see what happened under one intervention. So in practice, what we tend to do is, okay, I have a bunch of individuals that are on average the same. They have to be on average the same. And I see a bunch of them have applied a treatment and the other don't have the treatment. So if they are on average the same, the only thing that differs between them is the treatment that they get assigned to. Then all the difference that arised from that point onwards can be attributed to the treatment. So because they are on average the same, I apply treatment to part of them, and they are the same. This is very important. They have to be roughly the same, on average the same. if that's the case, I can conclude that whatever difference I observe from that point onward is only due to the treatment, because that's the only fundamental difference between them.
Yeah, thanks for adding those details. I think that was really insightful. You are the author of the book Causal Inference for the Brave and True, right? I mean, I read this book 2, 3 months ago, and I reread the book again just as a prep for our talk today. I really recommend this book to anybody who's just getting started with causal inference. But one thing that struck me when I first picked up this book is that, the title, Causal Inference for the Brave and True. Why did you include the word brave and true? What was the rationale behind it?
Okay, so I actually stole that title from another book, which is called Closure for the Brave and True, that I was reading at the time. So my company actually owns Closure, the Closure language, and we use Closure all the time. And I was learning Closure, so I picked up that book, Closure for the Brave and True. But why do I think that title resonated with something that I wanted to write is that I had some bad experience teaching in private universities where the only focus that people had was getting a degree. They didn't want to learn anything, and I had to dumb down the content. And I really don't like dumbing things down. So from the get-go, I get the message that I wanted to send to people is that, look, this is hard. Like, this is not for everyone. And the reason that this is valuable is that it is hard. If it were for everyone, it wouldn't be valuable by definition. So this is hard. I'm going to do my best to make it approachable and to remove all the barriers to entry. I'm not going to gatekeep anything, and I'm not going to sound overly academic I'm not going to try to make myself sound smart. I'm going to make this approachable, but it is inherently hard. And before you come into this book, you have to come in knowing this is not for everyone, and that you will have to put some effort into reading it. So that's, I think, the title of it. I'm generally not interested in what people call like democratizing knowledge, because I think if you by definition, if it's for everyone, then it becomes less valuable. It's something that everyone has access to, then the value of it decreases. So I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in approaching things with the complexity that it is due, but in the easiest way possible.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of quotes attributed to Einstein. I think one of those quotes is that, make everything simple, but not simpler, because when you make things more simpler, you start to lose the essence of it. I think I'm with you on this. Like, you can only simplify data science or statistical concepts to a certain degree, but beyond that, you start to, lose touch with the reality. So I really like the, explanation that you gave for the book, the causal inference for the brave and true. But quite honestly, when I read it, I interpreted it in a different way. Because I'm into consulting, I often come across, a lot of other vendors and also clients, wherein you will have to, stick your neck out and speak the truth, right? Sometimes, clients would say, hey, I invested, $1 million on TikTok. I invested $1 million on TV. I want to see these variables come into the model. Why isn't it coming? And then some vendor would say that, oh, okay, I'm obliged to kind of bring these variables into the model, and I will do some kind of hanky panky and bring those model variables into the model. So here, the client is, the vendor is not being truthful, and he or she is not also being brave. So I kind of interpreted in that sense. Do you kind of would give this kind of interpretation to, your causal inference work or not?
Yeah, I think that's something definitely that it is on my work, and something I actually been struggling in the recent years. Like, when I wrote this, causal inference was not a thing. I think it became a thing in the recent years. And this is both good but also bad, because I also see a lot of people using causal inference as if it was a magic bullet, exactly like you're mentioning. Hey, I have this cool algorithm, and if I apply to it, causality magically happens. And that's what people want to hear, right? I also have this experience in consulting, where I'm often faced with two paths. Like, okay, I can pretend that this is simple and I can just use some propensity score or whatever and pretend that all co-founders are observable and we can call it a day because there's no way we can verify this. It's fundamentally verifiable. You will have to take my word for it. Or I could go the correct way, which is to say to you, hey, this is very hard. We have to look at natural experiments. Can you please let me intervene instead of just using observational data? Is there a way that we can generate more data? So I think that was the original take on it. And I think it still is the take on the book that, okay, we have a bunch of these methods that we can apply to it. Mostly, I'm referring to methods that rely on the CIA, the unconfoundedness assumption. But we really want to go there only as a last resort. We really don't want to look at them and think of them as magic bullets. And they have to be accompanied with a lot of caveats before we use them, if we want to be honest.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I mean, going back into your book, right? In the very first page, there is this excellent example of the beer and foam analogy. Would you like to explain to our audience, what is this analogy?
Sure. I think it ties back to what I was saying about democratizing, right? So that's an analogy that comes from finance. I really like finance, so I took a lot from it. So I think there is the stuff that is interesting and that gets people jumping into it a lot, and because it's very interesting and people are paying a lot of money to whoever has this knowledge. So this was also the case for data science, like back in 2015. A lot of people were jumping into data science and only taking a surface level course, only like a 6-month course on it, and trying to become data science. And I think that's the foam, right? The foam is the hype, the thing that gets people jumping into whatever area it is. I think in causal inference, it is the machine learning part, is that people thinking that they can just run double machine learning or import whatever package and run it, and they will magically have causality out of it. So I think that's the foam. The foam is whatever attracts people. And the beer is really the hard part, what's beneath it, what really interested us is like, what are the underlying assumption? What is the statistical part behind it that you really need to be careful? What's the part that is really valuable and that's not going to go away? So the foam is, you can also think of it in this way. It's the part that is going to go away pretty quickly. The value of it is going to dissipate. The beer is going to stay there. The beer is it's what's really valuable. And again, if we talk about the economics of it, that's the hard part. By definition, if it's hard, it's going to be valuable. No, not exactly, but for something to be valuable, it has to be hard. It has to be hard, otherwise it will lose value very quickly because a lot of people would jump into it and then supply would go skyrocket and then the value would decrease.
Yeah, there's a saying that, we stand on the shoulders of giants. So when you take an example of statistics or economics, of course, a lot of hard work has been done by, really great statisticians like R.A. Fisher, Pearson, etc. And now, we come to the machine learning world. A lot of people also say that, hey, machine learning is just, statistics on steroids. And, similarly, you talked about double machine learning, and I think you coined the word that it is, WFL on steroids. We will, of course, touch upon that later on. But yeah, it's an excellent analogy, Matthew. So I think I really liked it. I mean, building up on, on the other chapters that you have written, right? From what I could glean, you place a larger emphasis on statistical rigor, which is what we also do at ADMA Labs. And I also personally, vouch for a lot of statistical rigor. But if you recollect Leo Bremen's, the seminal paper, The Two Cultures in Statistics, right? I think it was published in 2001, wherein he kind of, admonished statisticians for being too much focused on, the inference part, which I call as beta hat, rather than, being focused on y hat, which is just prediction focused. But don't you think the pendulum has swung, too much in the other direction right now, where, people have kind of forgotten beta hat, the inference part, and more fixated towards the prediction part only. I mean, I got a sense that, you are trying to imply that through your book. Am I right in my interpretation?
Yeah, yes. So it's not to say that the machine learning part is not important. I think it's very important, but I think it's much easier, right? And again, it might be biased from my experience. Let me give you an example from where I work. So I work in a bank. So what is the fundamental problem of a bank is you come for me for a loan, and I have to figure out if I'm going to give you a loan and at what interest rate, right? So what is one fundamental problem in this business problem is that, okay, so let's say that I have a best ever deep learning neural network ensemble with a light GPM, whatever, that it's very good at predicting if you're going to default. So we're not talking causal inference here, we're just talking predictions, right? So I'm going to go to the statistics from here is because I have this very good model, and this is a very precise model. It's a very precise model to know if you're going to default or not. But what is the problem of this model? The problem of this model is that it was trained on the data that was trained on. I only know who defaulted. I only know the risk of people that came for me for a loan. So I only know the target for those that I have already given a loan to. But where I'm using this model, I'm using this model on people that I've never seen before. So think about it this way. The training population of this model is the clients of the bank. The test population where I'm applying this model is the population of the country where I'm using this model. So there's a fundamental difference in populations here, right? I'm estimating a model here and applying elsewhere. This is a fundamental statistical problem. And that's why this is what I get paid for. Like the machine learning part, sure, yeah, I have to do it, but it's not the hard part. I can fit a light GBN model, I can do hyperparameter tuning because this is much simpler in this sense. Now, figuring out how different the population that I have and the population that I'm going to apply to, this is very hard. And there's other sorts of complications, right? So let's say that I have this population where I'm applying my model to, but this population is changing over time in a very particular way, right? I'm accepting loans from customers from this population, and as I get bigger, the pool of customers that are left that I have never applied to are only the riskier and riskier population. So this population is also not static; it's non-stationary. It's getting worse over time, and there's also macroeconomic trends, right? Some crisis comes up, some COVID comes up, and this population that I'm applying my model to shifts to whatever direction. Now, knowing this is very, very important to me, the understanding this population. And it's not basic statistics, but if I don't know the basics very well, I'm going to get screwed. So I think knowing very well the basics of statistics is what really I get paid to do. Like it's figuring out when my model is going to go wrong, how my machine learning model is going to go wrong, and why it's going to go wrong, and fixing
Sure.
that.
Yeah. So why do you think the pendulum has swung in the other direction? And I can see that it's going back, like, in the recent years, people are placing a lot more emphasis on causal inference, which is good to see. So people are asking the question why, and they're just not satisfied with the answer. Hey, and machine learning algorithm predicted, XYZ. They're just not happy with that. They want to go beyond it. So I think the pendulum will keep swinging until we kind of, come to an equilibrium in some time. Yeah. In your book, you also, establish or you state that, causality can be established through two ways. One is through your randomized control trials, and then the quasi-causal experiments. And, one of the things that I really liked in your book is that, you like to tell the story through a lot of memes. I also like to, explain statistical concepts through memes. I was pretty bad at drawing. So the next best thing I could do is, leverage memes. And I could really resonate with your book because, I really appreciate people trying to simplify concepts, through memes. So here's what we're going to do. I have picked up some of the interesting memes from your book, and I would request you to, kind of explain it to our audience. Yeah.
Sure.
Let me know if my screen is visible.
Yeah, it is.
Let's go to the very first meme.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, here you go.
So yeah, I think that one is just to say how we should appreciate the fact that we have randomized experiments in A/B testing when we have them. So it's just to show that we should not take this for granted. It's very important. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it's something that we really like to have. It's the ability to randomize people into a treatment and a control group. Something really amazing to have.
Yeah, this is a great meme. I really liked it. I'm going to steal this one. But just to give you a background to the audience, I think this is physicist Katie Bowman, expressing her happiness or surprise, on discovering the true shape of, the black hole, if I recollect correctly. And that was on her system, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one I understood it really well. If you would like to, break it down for the audience, what are the symbols, the inverse T, and what is happening here?
Okay, so this is to clear some confusion that people have, is that once we do causal inference, we want to have the potential outcome independent on treatment, and people really confuse this and think, oh, I want my outcome to be independent of the treatment. But if we think about it, so this is like a meme from I forgot her name, is someone that's really famous for tidying up methods.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, this is something like, okay, this what doesn't spark joy is if I have my treatment independent of my outcome, it basically means that my treatment has no effect. So it doesn't spark joy because my treatment doesn't have effect. This what would mean to have my outcome independent of my treatment. Now, on the other hand, what we want is my potential outcome to be independent on the treatment, because the potential outcome, if you think about it, is what would happen under a treatment and what would happen under a control. So it's kind of like if the treatment has already happened for the potential outcome, and we don't want them to be correlated with the treatment, because this would mean that it would cause us to mistake correlation with causation. So something like, if back to the first example, if I only apply timeouts to kids that are more defiant, what would happen is that my treatment would not be independent on my potential outcome, because I would give more of my treatment to people that have more that are more defiant. So basically, I would have, in this case, let's say that the outcome, the bad behavior would be higher for those that have the treatment.
Great. And I think, economists use this symbol to mean something is orthogonal, the inverse T. I think that's how I, as a statistician, learned it. Is there a different meaning here?
No, I think it's yeah, it means orthogonal. I used the word independent. I don't
Okay.
think they, like, one implies the other, but not the other way around.
Okay.
I think orthogonality is weaker than independence.
Okay.
I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that.
No problem. Yeah, I really like this meme. Is it the bias creeping up? How would you explain this meme?
Yes, precisely. So this is bias creeping on the naive analysis that people like to make. So the naive analysis people like to make is, okay, I have a bunch of people that got this treatment and I have a bunch of people that didn't got this treatment. So I'm just going to compare them, right? I'm just going to compare whoever got the treatment and whoever did not get the treatment. And I'm going to claim that this is the causal effect of the treatment. But that's not true, because you can see in the back the bias the bias creeping in. So what is the bias creeping in is how do people are different from each other at a baseline level. So how treatment and control group are different from each other if they all did not get the treatment. So in the example of the timeout, this would mean that people where I apply my timeout are usually have a bad behavior regardless of I applying the timeout or not? Right? So how they differ before the treatment, I like to call it. That's not entirely precise, but I think it's good enough to explain this.
Yeah, this was a great one. Yeah. So, yeah, please go ahead and explain this. And I have a couple of questions on it. Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. So this is in the context of instrumental variables. So just for the audience, what is an instrumental variable? Is usually it's complicated. I'm going to explain it in the following way. Let's say that you cannot randomize, right? So let's say that in the example of a timeout, you cannot really randomize parents into applying a timeout versus not applying timeout because they don't want to be forced to do anything. So what you can do instead is that you can get a bunch of parents and you can randomize them into an incentive. So a bunch of parents go to they sit in a room where they get a training that explain the benefits of timeout, and a bunch of other parents get into a training where they see a training for not applying timeouts. So you're not randomizing timeouts directly, you're randomizing an incentive for parents to do timeout. And this is what we call an instrument. Is a variable that affects the treatment and does not affect the outcome. It only affects the outcome via the treatment. So for us to do inferences in this situation, we have to assume that there are not going to be defiers. So what a defier would be in this case is, let's say that I put a parent in training for timeout, and initially the parent was going to apply timeout, but because he saw the training incentivizing timeout, he's not going to apply timeout anymore. It's something like someone seeing an incentive and saying, now that you want me to do, I'm actually not going to do it anymore. So that's a defier, someone that gets incentivized to do something and does the opposite. So we have to assume that those people do not exist, or they exist in a very, very small proportion for us to be able to do inference with instruments.
Yeah, I think this is a really clever meme, and it opens up the topics around about randomization and controlling. I mean, just emphasizing more. When we talk about randomized experiments, right? A lot of people just say that, hey, randomization is alone enough. Do you think randomization alone is enough to establish causality, or do you think the controlling part, which is like the C in the RCT, is also equally important?
Sorry, the what?
The C in the RCT. The RCT stands for randomized control trial, and the C, the middle word, stands for controlling. How important do you think the word controlling is also important here?
I think that's philosophical. I come from economics background, so this is my background. I don't think the controlling part is that important. I think it might get in the way. Because you might, by controlling, you might reduce, you might make the environment too much restrictive and not reflective of what would happen in the wild, right? So economists, what they tend to do is that they randomize in the wild, and they see what happens to people under the circumstances versus that other circumstances, and this is really like the randomization part. The control part, I think I might be wrong. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it would be okay. Instead of randomizing on the wild, I bring everyone to a lab and I see how they behave in a lab, because that way I really isolate the effect of the thing that I'm trying to control for. Like there's a bunch of other sources of variability, and I might not find any effect because variability is too high, and then therefore I reduce variability by controlling for stuff. So my view is that usually, not always, but at least in social science, this tends to do more harm than good. Now, this is one question. The other question is that if I think that randomization is good for is enough for causality, I think it depends what type of causality do you mean. It might be enough if you just want to get a grasp on the average treatment effect, right? but I think we are, as a society, moving forward average treatment effect. We're not only interested in how a treatment affects people on average, but we want to be more individualized. We want to know for whom the treatment is most beneficial, or for whom the treatment might be detrimental. Like we've seen a bunch of this recently in the debates on vaccines, like people thinking, okay, maybe there's a group of people, the effect is good on the average, but there's this very tiny group that the vaccine might not work, therefore let's shut everything down. I think we should be more precise and really figuring out which are the people that benefit from this, which are the people that benefits the most from this, and which people have a detrimental impact on this. And randomization alone cannot solve this. It is important. You have randomization really helps you to solve this problem, but it's not sufficient to do this. This is a more broad example, but this is also very important on a company, on microeconomics in the industry, right? So in my case, what I really want to know is how different people respond to different interest rates, for instance. It's very easy for me to know what is the effect of interest rates on average, right? If I increase interest rate, I attract more riskier people, risk goes up, revenue goes up. That's easy. Well, what I'm really interested in is finding people that where if I put my interest very high, I'm going to get more revenue. But some people, if I put my interest very low, I'm going to get more revenue. So depending on what type of customer I'm facing, my optimal interest rate is going to be different. And this is what is called treatment effect heterogeneity, is the fact that
Yeah.
different people respond differently to the treatment.
Yeah, we are going to cover HT in much more detail down the segment. But just building upon the same question, right? The reason that I asked you about, RCTs and, more emphasis on controlling is that in marketing, or in the field that I am in, market mix modeling, there is one school of thought that, you can do RCTs in marketing. But I am on the other side of the fence who believes that no, you can't do RCTs in marketing because you will inevitably have a lot of defiers, just like the Pingu meme that you showed us. The defiers, they're not defying by willfully, but it just so happens accidentally, right? For example, you might say that, hey, these group of people will be exposed to the ad, and the other people will not. But inadvertently, they might, get exposed to it. I think it's the violation of a concept known as SUTVA, right? In causal inference.
Yes.
Yeah, so it happens, not willfully, but accidentally. And in marketing, it's very common. You can say that, hey, I'm going to expose only 100 people to my ad, and the other 100 people are not going to see that. But people are carrying their mobile phones always. They're watching the billboards while driving, and they will inevitably get exposed to it. You cannot hold them in a room and say that, hey, you're going to be lab rats for the next 1 week and just do only this.
Yeah, I would just argue that in this case, it's not that I don't think that you're against RCTs, that you're saying that RCTs
No.
don't work. I think what you're really saying is that I cannot apply RCTs here. It's not that you're saying, I think
Exactly.
what the mentality that we should have is that, look, I would really love to have an RCT here. And we need to have the RCT as the gold standard, as something to, okay, we want to get as close as possible to that ideal. But in a lot of situations, and I think marketing is one of them, it's just not possible because you have like networks effects that you have to have spillovers, right? Or you simply cannot randomize because they are not yet your customers, right? How are you going to randomize a billboard on the street, or even Google Ads, right? I think Google does not allow you to randomize on a customer level. I think only on audience level. I don't know if that changed, but still.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm not against RCTs. You're right. I mean, I love RCTs. It's the North Star for every causal expert, right? Try to get to that level. That's the gold standard, but it's not simply possible due to very many reasons, just that we just alluded to, right? So moving on and, asking a different set of questions. In your book, I always found a lot of graphical images, which we call as DAGs. So if you were to simplify and explain what are DAGs, how would you go about it?
Okay, so I think DAGs are a way to visualizing what assumptions are you going to make. it's a way for you to make clear how you think the data is generated, because in causal inference, a lot of the work goes into understanding or to making assumptions on how data was generated. So it's a way for you to make that clear and visible to everyone, and for it to start a conversation. So I think DAGs are useful in that sense. It's good to start a conversation with DAGs. Now, I don't come from that background of DAGs, so I don't, maybe I'm using them wrong, but I don't find them very useful past this point of generating the hypothesis. And even on that part, I think DAGs are not particularly useful when data gets a little bit more complicated, particularly when you have time dynamics. So I find that once you have, let's say, panel data or time series data, then the DAG starts to become very messy. I'm not sure it's good to look at them. They usually give more confusion or not, but I might be careful in saying that, because a lot of the issues we have in using time series data or panel data is because we have them because we did not look at the DAG. And if we looked at the DAG, then we might not have made the mistakes that we made using this sort of data. So it's still very complicated. So I don't know if they serve a purpose of making things visually and simple, but at least they make a purpose of making explicit what you're thinking, what your assumptions are.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, in my last episode also, I asked this question, to Quentin, and one of my philosophy with regards to this question is that DAX should be used as a hypothesis generating mechanism and not as a proof of causality. I have seen a lot of causal, inference method vendors. They portray this DAX and tell the clients that, hey, look, we have proved causality. But my belief is that no, that's not exactly true. Anybody can draw a diagram, a causal diagram, and say anything they want, but you haven't really proved it. But that's an education that needs to be had, in the client side. But sadly, I don't think many people have time for it. But it's just that image of a DAG, which gives the assurance to clients that, hey, these people must know their stuff, right?
Yeah, I don't know how. I know that there is causal discovery.
Mhm.
I'm not really an expert on it, but the last time I checked, I didn't really like it that much. I think it came with too many caveats to be applicable. So maybe that's what people are selling. I don't know exactly what assurance they can give when they are like building a DAG from data. I I yet don't feel comfortable with that. I think I'm with you. Like I rather use the DAG as an assumption than learning and estimating a DAG from data. I think that's very dangerous.
Yeah, I think epidemiologists and economists always fight about it. There was a famous fight between, or debate, not a fight, a debate between Guido Imbens and Judeapel. I don't know whether you've read that paper where they argue about, the utility of DAX. It's an excellent paper. I can leave the links in the comments and, people can read about it. Yeah. In your book, you also mention about, linear regression a lot. And I'm also a great fan of linear regression. I mean, the sad thing is that whenever I say linear regression to a person who is just getting started with statistics, he or she just assumes that a line between, a cloud of data points. They don't understand that, hey, that line could be wiggly and it could also have other shapes and forms. And when we say linear, we say that in the terms of, linear in parameters. But that's a nuance that a lot of people, don't get. In my field of market mix modeling, our foundation is multilinear regression, right? And when you talk about causal inference in your book, I think there's one title that you're given which says all you need is regression, right? So can you talk more about, why knowing regression is so important in causal inference?
I would say that it's not only so important in causal inference, it's so important in modeling, because
Yeah.
linear regression is a type of model that it has been around for a very long time. And we understand a lot of it, and we still don't understand everything about it. I think we understand a lot of it, but there is a lot of counterintuitive things about linear regression. And if you know those counterintuitive things about linear regression, you can extend that knowledge to more complicated models. So in my field of work, I usually don't deploy linear regression models into production. We usually use mostly light GBM or deep neural networks. But still, I run a lot of linear regression as iterative steps to understand what is going on. So linear regression, I think it's one of those basic statistical concepts that if you know, get applied everywhere else, right? It's something that extends everywhere else. It's very useful when you want to make explicit assumptions and when you want to really understand what is going on. So for instance, in my work, we have a very complicated machine learning model to predict if someone is going to default in the following year, right? But I don't need to know if someone is just going to default on every year. I need to understand what is the net present value of the loan through a lifetime, which is very long time. If it's a credit card, it might be like infinitely long time. And for me to project this default rate from 1 year into the future, or for me to build a cash flow, I'm usually going to rely on linear regression because I can make assumption about how this is going to evolve over time. I can make functional form assumption. I can make extrapolation assumptions. And this is very important if I'm projecting cash flows and making decisions on NPV or net present value basis. And it's really hard to do that with a machine learning model. And if they're tree-based, it's impossible even to extrapolate. So I think linear regression has two purposes: to give back control to you. And if you want to have this control, you better understand what you're doing with linear regression. And as an understanding step towards all the other models that can be applied to all the other predictive models or causal inference models that we use besides linear regression.
Yeah, linear regression is, of course, very important. I remember, creating a meme some time ago wherein I say that, when it comes into the realm of quasi-causal experiments, the way you prove causality is by, running a series of linear regressions, right? And WFL is basically running series of steps. And even if you have, let's say something known as an omitted variable bias, and you kind of create, two SLS models, again, it's a series of models. So there is no escaping linear regression in causal inference. And you're right that, people really should learn it, thoroughly, to know the assumptions. I've seen people mistake some assumptions, like, for example, the normality of errors assumption. They think that the independent variables themselves should be normally distributed, and hence they apply all these techniques to kind of normalize the variables, which is entirely wrong. It skews the results. Interpretation goes for a toss. But yeah, that's a education that needs to be had again, right? Talking about linear regression, right? In your book, you emphasize on OVB, that is omitted variable bias. In my field of market mix modeling, it happens all the time. A variable that needs to be included in the model is somehow missed. And then to solve this problem, we kind of, take leverage of, the instrumental variables. I know you already talked about instrumental variables before. Are there examples from your work life where you kind of missed the key variable at the first go, but then, kind of brought it in as an instrumental variable later on?
Yeah, there's one. I don't think I can talk about this one. Let me think. There's another one. Yeah. Okay. So one issue that we have with credit card is premium credit cards, right? So I don't know how is the market in the US. Probably pretty similar to Brazil. Like, you can have the basic credit card, or you can have a premium black credit card, which is much more expensive to the bank, but ideally would attract a heavy spender customer, and that would compensate. Now, you cannot, like, usually those credit cards, they come with a fee. The premium credit card comes with a fee, or they come with some sort of condition, right? You have to have X invested in the bank, or you have to have spend above a certain level, something like that. So although you could randomize, right? You could randomize availability to the card, like this group of people don't get the card and this group of people get the card. What happened is that the portion, so you have a control group, you have a treatment group, but on the treatment group, the vast majority of customers don't get the credit, the premium credit card. Only a small percentage of people get the credit card. And this is a classic example of IV, which is basically what we call non-compliance. You assign the treatment, but only a minority of people actually take the treatment. So you have to use IV to solve for that. Again, IV, I think it's very useful when randomization, when you really cannot do randomization, you might get away with using IV. And the alternative, I think it's not very compelling, which is, okay, only a small group of people used the credit card. Let's try to find in the control group a group of similar people to those ones that got the credit card. Probably those are people with higher income. Those are people with very good credit scoring. Those are people with good jobs. But as a bank, we don't know. This is what omitted variable bias is, right? So what information we have about our customers? We don't have income. We have credit scoring. We have their deposits. We have whatever data they have with us, but we don't have if they have investments, I don't know, elsewhere in other banks. So there's a lot of things we don't know, and those are the omitted variables, right? We don't know how people are, so we might not make this pairing correctly. We might just, let's say that we only know about their credit score, so we might pair people in the treatment group with high credit score with people in the control group with high credit score. And we might claim that they are equal. But there's a lot of stuff we don't know. Maybe these people have high credit score, but also have high income or a high paying job, and this stuff that we don't know. And the people that we're pairing them with don't have a high income or don't have a very good job. And this is what omitted variable bias is. We might try to make we might try to make the treated and the untreated group comparable, but because we don't know everything about them, the pairing might not make them comparable enough because there's stuff we don't know.
Yeah. Again, talking about linear regression, I think not only linear regression, even causal inference, whenever you're trying to interpret the results, there almost always comes the p-value, right? A lot of people dread it. I mean, the very simplistic way I explain p-value to people is that it is the probability of just observing the data given your null hypothesis, right? That's it. But people kind of misconstrue it and say that no, it's about the probability of the hypothesis being true. I really like this illustration that you made. I'll go back to your a meme. It's not a meme exactly, but I think it's a illustration. Let me quickly share my screen. Oh, I don't have it. Sorry. I think it's a illustration about the bell curve, and you talk about the causal inference. I mean, you talk about the p-value where it's at the extreme end of the tail, right? And I think that was a beautiful illustration to tell the people that it is about the probability of observing the data rather than the hypothesis itself being true. Have you encountered cases where people have misinterpreted p-values in causal inference?
Yeah, less in my company, more on life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what people misinterpret data is on science in general. So what really people want to say with the p-value is that this is the probability that this parameter is true. But that's very, very, very hard to do, right? That's something it's a very hard claim because all what you have is only this data here. So how are you going to claim something about the parameters if you only have this data? So the p-value is a much weaker claim, which is okay. This is the probability of seeing this data if this result was if the null hypothesis if this result was correct. Now, this I think ties a lot to how we look up on science. So let's say that we see a bunch of this is very common in health, right? So let's say that we have a bunch of studies that show that vegetable oil, seed oil, is better for your blood health than animal oil, like fat from animals. But once in a while, it comes a study that shows the other way around. It shows that vegetable oils might be bad for your heart compared to fat oil. And if you get caught on into the p-value, you might isolate the study and say, hey, this study is the truth. But actually, what you have to do in order to find the probability of that being the truth, you have to look across a bunch of studies and do some sort of Bayesian pooling on all those studies, which is how you make a reasonable claim about the probability of that being correct. But you cannot do that from a single study. You have to pull it from multiple sources. So
It's about
this,
meta-analysis. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's the biggest confusion that people make when they're doing p-value. So p-value it's something that is talking about that data that you have at that moment in time, which might not be true if you gather more data or if you look at other sources of data, et cetera, et cetera. That's what you would need in order to make the claim that you want, which is the probability of the hypothesis being correct.
Understood. Yeah, that was beautifully explained. Talking about quasi-causal methods, right? I think this is one place where both economists and marketeers or marketing scientists like us shake hands. It's because, we cannot do RCTs in our field, and we are just left with observational data, and, quasi-causal experiments are the go-to methods. And just few days back, I had created a, post saying that, linear regression is to data science what DID is to causal inference. It's like the gateway, tool, right? I mean, people feel that DID is very easy to do. Why do you think that is? Is it, really that simple, or people should watch out for some, key pitfalls?
In quasi experiments,
Especially DID, difference in differences.
okay. So I think difference in difference can really come to bite you in the behinds if you're not very careful with it. Because what most the assumption that it makes is it's very counterintuitive. So there's a very good course on difference in difference by a political science, I think from Stanford, and he is basically the entire course just talking how can the idea assumptions be violated. And one way that it can be violated is that if the decision to treat is based on the previous series of outcomes, and this is what we see all the time in companies and in marketing, I guess, right? So product is going down, the trend of the product is going down. What you do is you apply marketing to it in the hopes that it goes down, it goes up. Now, the fact that you decided the treatment based on the trajectory of outcome violates the assumption that the D&D needs to make, right? So what difference in difference, the assumption that difference in difference makes is that the treatment and the control was assigned like on a block. You might look at the levels of the outcome, right? You might see, okay, this outcome is high, this outcome is low, and you allow for a difference in levels of the outcome, but you do not allow for a difference in the trajectory of the outcomes. So if you make decisions on the treatment based on the trajectory, you're violating difference in difference. If you make decisions on the level of the outcome, then you don't violate difference in difference. So, and this is very subtle. I don't know if people listening to this are appreciating the subtleties of this, but this can mess up a lot of difference in difference analysis, especially in the industry, because industries tends to make decisions based on trajectories. And if you make the decision based on the trajectory, then you will mess up the parallel trend assumption. So this is one place where difference in difference gets messed up. Another place where difference in difference get messed up is if you have staggered adoption. So you have a bunch of people, you apply a treatment to a group of people here, and you say, oh, this is working. Now you apply to a bunch of people here, and then you apply to a bunch of people here. So you gradually roll out the treatment, and then you try to merge everything together. And there's a lot of parametric assumptions in difference and in linear regression, and that's why you really need to understand linear regression that might get people off guard, is that if you apply this difference analysis in a staggered adoption design, you have to make further parallel assumptions, and if those are not met, you also might end up with a very bad estimate for what your causal parameter is. Intuitively, particularly, what can go wrong is that you might have heterogeneity in time. So let's say that you apply a treatment and the treatment takes some time to mature. So it starts with a very small impact, and the impact gets increase over time. Or if it increases and then decrease, so the effect is not immediate. So if the effect is not immediate, you have to make adjustments to difference, and I think that's what the entire literature in the last 4 years has been about, is how do you accommodate for time heterogeneity on the treatment for differences.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for touching upon those, pitfalls, right? I mean, you're right in the sense that, both DID and linear regression, they can be really powerful, but the assumptions need to be, adhered to, right? But at the same time, there are, reasonableness to the assumptions. So I'm just going to, kickstart a small game with you, wherein I'm going to ask you to place certain assumptions in the certain buckets here. And I may also talk you out of it or coax you into, giving a particular answer. Let me share my screen. And I hope you can see my screen.
It's low.
Can you see my screen? Okay,
yes.
So let's start with DID's parallel trends assumption, right? I mean, do you think people are placing a lot more emphasis on, in it, or, people should be, more relaxed about it? Where would you place DID's parallel trends assumption? Is it a reasonable assumption, unreasonable, or impossible to have in, in your real practical work life?
I think it's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's reasonable in the sense that even though if it's not entirely satisfied, if you use other methods like synthetic controls or something like that, the results that you get with methods that relax the parallel trend assumptions tend to be not very different from difference. So at least directionally, in most cases, it's reasonable. It can go wrong. I'm not saying that it's always reasonable and that you should not watch out for it. I'm just saying that in my experience, if you try difference, which is the bread and butter, and you try something more complicated, usually the results align at least directionally.
Yeah, I'm with you on this. I'm not going to push back because I find that, DID's parallel trends assumption is kind of reasonable. At least you have a control group in reality to benchmark against, right? And when you compare it with to something like synthetic control methods, which is, of course, the control is actually synthetic. I think, in my opinion, SEM synthetic twin is not reasonable at all. But before I give out my answer, where would you place SEM synthetic twin? Is it reasonable, unreasonable, or impossible? Or maybe you can just give the audience a flavor of, what we are talking about. What is SCM in brief, and what do we do with the synthetic twin assumption?
Yeah, so I'm not, you probably have more experience with me than on this one, right? So synthetic control is once you have time series of individuals and of individuals that are on the control group, and you usually have only a few units of individuals that are treated. And what you want to do is that you want to control a synthetic version. You want to mimic the time series behavior of the treated individual using the time series behavior of the control individuals. This is very dangerous because you're making assumptions on the time series, and time series are very hard to deal with. Where I use this, and I think it's reasonable to use this, is when I do geographic experiments. So in this particular case, I have some control on the data generating process. I know how I decided to treat some geographics or others. I might even randomize geographics in the treatment or control group. And the reason why I'm using synthetic control is because I have a very small number of treated units. So if that's the case, like that's the way I see synthetic control being used, is that the number of units are very small, the number of treated units is very small, and you have a very large pool of control units and some understanding on how the treatment was assigned. I think that it's reasonable. If you want to use undescriptably, like just hoping that the time series behavior is going to pair between a treatment and control, I think that's unreasonable, because time series is really it's really something very hard to. You're making the assumption that the time series that you saw in the past is going to continue on to the future, and that's very unreasonable assumption to make.
Yeah, so would you place it in reasonable? And I can give you my perspective on where I would place it. So where would you place it?
I would place it in reasonable.
Okay, great. I mean, my perspective is that, of course, we have done a lot of geo experiments, and there often comes a time where you don't have a control market, right? And the question is, how do you get a control market? Do you just lump up artificial set of markets together? I don't know whether you know this meme. There is a meme where, somebody puts the head of a elephant and the body of a penguin, and the person asks, hey, what the hell is this? That's what I kind of, envision whenever we talk about SEM synthetic twin. You put a hodgepodge of things together and say that, hey, this particular control market is mimicking the treatment prior the intervention. But rarely in reality it is the case. At least from my experience in marketing, I find that to be really, I would say, borderline unreasonable and impossible, maybe. But yeah, I think you have given out a really good rationale. So yeah, we can place it in SEM synthetic twin. What about SUTVA in marketing, right? Or you can take about in you can talk about your field of fintech. Where would you place it?
That's again, I think it depends on what's the level you're looking at. If you're looking at the individual, it's completely unreasonable.
Mhm.
And it depends on what marketing you're mentioning, right? So if you're looking at online marketing, Google ads, Facebook ads, I think it's very unreasonable or impossible. If you're thinking about geographic experiments, I think it's more reasonable. So you're assuming people don't cross borders a lot. It's still not completely true, but it's more reasonable. So I would place it between unreasonable and impossible for, I think, individual for most cases.
Okay, I'm placing it here, right? 50-50 about that.
Yeah.
Talking about a perfect balancing in propensity score matching, right? I know you come from the fintech world. Earlier on in my career, I also got an opportunity to work with the banking and finance domain, wherein we kind of leveraged a logistic regression very differently. Where I think you must have heard about the design analysis, right? Wherein the top 3 deciles or 4 deciles is decided on whom we should pursue for giving loans or giving credits, and that kind of similar algorithm can be applied in propensity score matching. But you think there is something known as a perfect balance that you can create in reality?
Mm, I think we have to be careful here. I think in social science, it's completely unreasonable. For some reason that I'm not an expert in, it seems that propensity score matching works on the health sciences. I don't know why, but it seems that when they benchmark results with propensity score and with RCTs, they tend to align. So there's some magic that the people on the health science do that propensity score is reasonable. On the social science, I think it's mostly reasonable. There is one case where I like to use it, is that you have a RCT and somehow the RCT got messed up in production. It happens a lot. And in those cases, the what invalidates the RCT is usually some random errors. Someday the stuff was not in production, and then something got messed up in the way, whatever. It's not something that is all the time, that is consistent, that is a consistent difference between treatment and control. It's like a bug here, a bug there. And in those cases, I think to adjust for a small deviance in balance between treatment and control, I think propensity score can help.
Okay, so
It's
can I
better
put
than
it,
just doing treatment minus control, at least.
yeah, so can I put it somewhere between reasonableness and unreasonable?
Yes.
Okay, great. So there you go. And the last one is about, regression discontinuity. There is this rule about, the sharp cutoff, right? Only once you cross that threshold, a treatment is applied. In your experience, have you applied RDD, or do you think this kind of assumption is reasonable, unreasonable, or impossible?
Yeah, I think it's very reasonable in business,
Okay,
because business love to threshold decisions. We love to threshold decisions.
exactly.
Like, hey, if your credit score is above X, then you get this credit line. If it's below X, then you get the other credit line. So unless there is a bug, you can really use the thresholding that is applied in the business to make those decisions, right?
Yeah, I'm
And
with you on
again, this
that.
is for my business, where we threshold decisions all of the time. Like, we have thresholds on income, we have thresholds on credit scoring, we have thresholds on everything. We don't like continuous decisions. We really like to put people into buckets, and
That
because we like to put people into buckets, you can explore the boundaries of those buckets to make causal inference. So I think that assumption is it's very reasonable. You have to be careful though, because there's also when people use RDD, it's very local, so it's very hard to extrapolate, right? You have to be careful that the causality that you're making is only around those thresholds. You cannot say that, let's say that I give a limit increase to people based on their credit scoring, but they are all low credit score. You cannot say that the same limit increase will have the same impact for people with a higher credit score. So you have to be careful on how to extrapolate that. But I think it's very reasonable, at least in my business.
Yeah. Thanks for this, Matheus. I think this particular game was both insightful and fun for me. The only place I would disagree with you slightly is in the SEM synthetic twin part. I would put it in the impossible realm. But apart from that, I would agree with everything that you put out here. Yeah. So moving on to our next question. Uh, I mean, we touched about, the heterogeneous treatment effects, right? In marketing, as I gave you the example of geo experiments, I had one example where the client wanted to know which of the markets is, working for him or her. And then there was a subsequent granular question. Can you tell me which subset of people that I must, target? And that, I think, comes in the purview of HTEs, right? Have you dealt something like this in your, economics or, fintech?
Yeah, so I think your case is a lot harder because randomization is already a problem. So in your example, even understanding the average treatment effect is already a challenge. In my field, in fintech, understanding the average treatment effect is, for most part, there are exceptions, but for most part, is very easy. What really interests me is the average is the heterogeneity. In particular, I'm interested in two sources of heterogeneity. So there are two decisions that a bank needs to make: the amount of credit to give and at what price to give, right? And we're not like, if we look at this from a perspective of an average treatment effect, what that would imply is that I'm going to give everyone the same amount at the same interest rate. That's what a decision based on average treatment effect would look like. And in credit, that decision would probably be unprofitable. It would probably be that if I gave the same amount of money at the same credit rate for everyone, this would probably make the bank go bankrupt. So it's very important for the bank to be able to discretize between people where the treatment effect, interest, and loan amount is profitable versus not profitable. And what you usually have is you have a parabola, right? You have a point where there's an optimal here, and for you to find that point where is the optimal, you really need to understand what is the treatment effect of increasing interest rates on revenue and on losses. So that's basically what my job is about: finding what's the treatment effect of interest rates on losses, finding the effect of interest rates on revenue, The same thing for credit, for loan amount, and at the not individual level, but at the subgroup level, right? So people, this very subgroup here. Particularly, what we're trying to figure out is we want to find the golden customers for a bank is the customer that are the revenue, the spend part is very sensitive to credit line. So if I give a tiny amount of credit line, all that credit gets spent, so very sensitive. And the loss part is it's non-sensitive. It's very insensitive to increases in credit, right? So if I increase a little bit of credit, the risk does not increase a lot. So that's what I'm looking for. So basically, the entire field of banking is understanding those sensitivities and zooming in and giving more credit to people that meet those characteristics.
Great. That was an excellent example. Talking about evaluation, right? I mean, evaluation of causal models. I mean, I'm in the field of market mix modeling, and in my field also, people take the shortcut of trying to prove to clients that hey, we have proved that MM is working by giving a picture of the prediction accuracy, because it's always easier to prove that, right? You have the ground truth and you have your predicted value, and you can tell the client, look how small the gap is, how close we came to the ground truth. But the biggest problem in causal inference is that there is no ground truth most often than not. How do we then evaluate, causal methods?
I don't have an answer for marketing. I think it's very hard. I think one way, I don't know, like we can discuss this. I don't know if we're going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
But on my field, we have if you can do at least an RCT or a quasi experiment or some sort, or if you have some control on the variable that you're trying to intervene on, I think you can leverage that. And you have basically two ways to evaluate a model. The first way to evaluate a model is this model calibrated, meaning does the effect it predicts. So it's still a prediction question, but it's a counterfactual prediction problem, counterfactual prediction question, right? Does the effect that this model predicts plays out if I do a randomized control trial or if I apply this to production? So I think the way to evaluate the models for causality is to think of, yes, it is still a predictive question, but it's now a counterfactual predictive question, right? So there's stuff like, okay, maybe you can deploy the model to production and you made a counterfactual claim, right? You said, okay, if I apply this treatment to this number of people, this is the effect that I'm going to see. And you go ahead and do that. And if it turns out that you're wrong, then maybe your model is not very good. Of course, that's not the ideal way to do. Ideally, you want to evaluate your model offline, right? With the data that you already have. And if you have some sort of experiments, you can do that. If you have some sort of experience, it becomes a little bit similar to machine learning in the sense that you can hold out a set of data, you can build a model here to predict its effect, and you can validate if the effects it predicted plays out in the other on the other data set. Again, this relies on having RCTs or having quasi experiments of some sort that you can leverage.
Understood. So you're trying to say that there's no particular metric, but it's just the process of doing the experiments and the rigor involved and checking whether the assumptions hold, which kind of gives you the whole picture whether you have done the causal inference test properly or not.
Yeah, no, there are metrics. You can get into metrics like there is the area between the Kini curve, below the Kini curve. This is mostly a metric for heterogeneous treatment effects. You can do calibration metrics using linear regression. So basically, you plug your causal prediction into a linear regression model, and you see the parameter should be close to 1. If it's close to 1, it means that it closely capture your effect. So there are metrics for it. What I'm just trying to get into here is that it's not just like machine learning models where you just separate into holdout and training set, because there's something more that you need. You need to have some sort of randomization for those metrics to even make sense. If you don't have any sort of randomization, those metrics, they will be computable, but they will mean nothing. Like they're meaningless.
Got it. So we have come to the last two questions of our segment. In your book, you also mention about double ML, right? And you also call double ML WFL on steroids. If you can, in a short example, explain to people what is it, why do you call it WFL on steroids, that would be great.
Yeah, because it is like I cannot see another way of seeing double machine learning as linear regression on steroids. So I think one key thing that people don't appreciate about linear regression is that linear regression are actually two models inside one. There's actually a quite neat proof of that. Like you can even see linear regression as something that people call a doubly robust model. But linear regression is doing two things. The first thing that it's doing is that it's trying to predict the treatment. And why is it doing that? Why is linear regression trying to predict the treatment? Because if I have, let's say that I have randomization. If I have randomization, if my treatment is random, then by definition, the treatment is not predictable. And linear regression will try to predict the treatment and is going to say, hey, I cannot predict this. The residual of this prediction, the error of this prediction is huge. Hey, use this. This is the error of my prediction of trying to predict my treatment. Now, if the treatment is not random, then it's predictable. You can predict the treatment from the things that caused the treatment because the treatment is not random. And that's what linear regression is going to do. It's going to predict the treatment from the variables that you give it to it, and it's going to compute the error. And what this error, it has a very important meaning. What this error means is that what is left for my treatment that is random after I have accounted for all the things that I've included in my regression. So that's what regression is doing, is trying to predict the treatment and extracting the error. What is the error of predicting the treatment? Is everything that is not explained by the variables that I have. And if it's not explained, it's as if it were random once I've accounted for all those variables. So this is random variation. Another way to see this is that this is the residual of predicting the treatment is just like a version of the treatment that is random, as good as randomly assigned. Like this, you cannot predict it further. Everything that was already predicted and everything that is left is basically just random noise. So it's like a random version of a treatment that was initially non-random. This is what regression is doing. That's the gist of it. This is what regression is doing. That's what's important for regression. This is how regression controls accounts for bias in the variable. And that's enough for establishing causality, again, assuming that you can control for all the things that are causing the treatment. Now, regression is not satisfied with that. There's also another thing that regression is doing that is not necessarily, but that's very nice to have, which is also reducing variance. So regression is also predicting the y variable and extracting everything that is left. So let's say that you predict the y variable, the outcome variable from all the controls. What is left is only variation in the y variable, in the outcome variable, that is not explained by the control variables, the x variables. So now you have these two interesting pieces, which is, okay, you have a version of the treatment, which is random variation, because regression already predicted everything away that was predicted of it. And you have a version of the y variable where everything that was predicted of it was excluded away. So you have these two interesting pieces. You have a version of the treatment that is ideally without bias, and you have a version of the outcome where all the variance was explained away. So ideally, all that is left in this version in this y variable is variation due to the treatment. And what you do then is, what regression does is try to predict what is left of the variation in the outcome with what is left in the variation of the treatment. And that's the causal effect it predicts, again, assuming all the controls are accounted for. So that's what regression is doing. And if you apply double machine learning, you're doing exactly the same thing, but instead of using regression to compute all those steps, you're using whatever machine learning model you're using. So that's why I call it linear regression on steroids. It's because it is, like, there's no other way of describing it.
Yeah, I think that was really beautifully explained. I certainly got it, and I'm sure, the audience got it as well, right? Just talking about LLMs, there are people who call it a stochastic parrot, and some people are also, stretching it a bit and saying that, hey, you know what, there is some sort of causal inference happening when the LLM is giving you an answer. Do you think there is some sort of element of causality happening when an LLM generates an answer to your question and gives it to you?
Yes, I think there's definitely an element of causality. So I think one way to understand how causality and LLM interacts is to think about covariance drift. So for the audience who don't know what covariance drift is, that let's say that you have data here, and with time, the data is not going to be here anymore, it's going to be over there. So data shifts over time. So I think LLM captures well the causality that is established up until this point, because it read a bunch of scientific articles. So if it knows what we know as a society about what causes what, right? So I think it has an element of causality because it read a bunch of stuff and it knows what we know about causality. I'm not sure LLM is very good at figuring out new sources of causality. I don't think it was designed to do that. And I don't know if figuring out new sources of causality can be figured out by text alone, right? Of course, if it's a text about a causal article, of course it can, but it's the LLM is not learning causality, it's learning a paper that learned causality. So I think that's the sense where LLMs know about causality.
Yeah, that was beautifully explained. Yeah, I think I agree with your example. So coming to our last question, your book is read by a lot of, aspiring causal inference analysts and data scientists. And in your book, you also have references to a lot of classic books, right? Which classic causal books would you recommend for anybody, looking to get started with causal inference?
Cool. So I think the one that got me the most was Mostly Harmless Econometrics, because it talks about very simple methods with a lot of depth, and so it gives a lot of thought to all those methods. It basically talks about linear regression, propensity score matching, IVs, and difference in differences. So I think it gives a lot. It gives a lot of the basis for you to understand everything else that is in causal inference. So I think that's a very good book. It's long. If you want a shorter version, I think that's not the way to go. But I think if you want a solid understanding about causal inference, I think that's a good book.
Yeah, I think I would put it in this way that, a gateway book would be your book. And if people want to do a deep dive, they can go to, the Mostly Harmless Econometrics by Josh Angrist, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yeah. Again, I think they serve different purposes, right? So my purpose is more for people that want to apply this in their job, and Joshua's book is more to people who want to apply them in social sciences.
Understood. Yeah. Matthews, thank you for your time. I think I really enjoyed this conversation. It was really insightful, intellectual, and yeah, thank you very much for your time. I hope you liked the conversation.
I did very much. I hoped I was entertaining enough for the audience. Let's see. And I really appreciate you having me and for the invite.
Thank you, Matthews. Thanks for your time.